Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Music Technology. Today we're having a look into Studio One from PreSonus, specifically the CV instrument. This is something that is not deeply covered by PreSonus, either in their demo videos or in other tutorials and bits and pieces, and few people are talking about it. And yet, to me, it's a remarkable protrusion into the potential of DAW and modular integration. These things already exist. There are other bits of software like Bitwig that does it very, very well. There are plugins like Silentway and CV tools for Ableton that allow you to bring your MIDI world into your Eurorack by taking the tools within your DAW and converting them into control voltages that your modular will understand. Now, the CV instrument plugin within Studio One is there. It's there from version 7 and it will do precisely that. It gives us the opportunity to sequence from Studio One into your modular and also modulate into your modular. It has an enormous amount of potential which isn't entirely realized yet, but the fact that it's there means that at least PreSonus are thinking about it and there could be great things down the line. However, let's not worry about what it may be. Let's have a look at what it is and how we make it work, how we can use it ourselves, and how ultimately we can connect Studio One to our modular for a little bit of sequencing. I mean, that's enough really, isn't it? A little bit of sequencing, that's quite good fun. Now, the key element to all this is that your audio interface that you're using with Studio One, generally speaking, has DC coupled outputs. What that means is that it doesn't have the usual sort of filtering that you would find in audio connections. Because normally speaking, when you're recording audio, you're trying to block out very, very low rumbling frequencies that cause interference or flat voltages that might cause offsets to your audio, making it just wrong. And so usually in regular outputs, you have a filter built in, a high pass filter that removes all that very, very bottom low end stuff. But with control voltage, we want those very low, slow moving signals. We want LFOs, which are very slow moving. We want individual voltages, which allow us to control pitch and other bits of modulation. Those are generally speaking filtered out of a regular audio interface. However, if you have an audio interface with DC coupled audio outputs, then they don't have that filter and they will let voltages through and you can use them in this scenario. An example would be the Motu M4, which I've got here, which I've used a lot for this sort of thing. It has 4 outputs. You could use all 4 of them for control voltage. Obviously, you couldn't then hear anything within Studio One at the same time, so you would perhaps use 2 of them. So with a simple audio interface like this, you can use the whole of Studio One and all of its software instruments and bits and pieces, and you could use the other 2 outputs to control a bit of modular. There are other audio interfaces with loads and loads of DC coupled outputs that you can use. PreSonus actually does its own ones, and you also have a lot of luck from people like RME and other bits and pieces. So it's not something which is desperately unusual, but you do need to find that out first, or you're not going to get anywhere with this. Now, I'm lucky enough to have in my possession a Bitwig Connect 412. It's a new audio interface which is actually designed expressly for this purpose. It has normal audio interface things going on, but it also has this row of patch sockets at the top which are designed for integration with your modular. Now, these are just audio inputs and outputs, just like any other audio interface, but they are specifically DC coupled and calibrated, ready to go into your modular. So that's what I'm going to be using. But you could be using any other audio interface which has regular inputs and outputs, like on here, and you would just be using jack adapters to get down to mini jacks to go into your modular. Yeah? Are you with me? So I'm using this because it's brilliant and it's convenient, and will let me show you what it can do with a minimum of fuss and effort. Because there is a little bit of effort involved in getting all this to work. But these things are getting easier and better and smoother all the time. So, come with me. Let's have a look at the CV instrument. There's a couple of things that it can do. I'll show you how to set it up. I'll show you it sequencing and modulating things. It's in the hope that that will encourage you to give that a go so you can approach it with a better understanding of what it is that you can expect from it. So just to explain my setup here so that we're absolutely clear, this is a Surface Pro 9 running Studio One version 7. This is the Bitwig Connect 412 audio interface. This is running just normal audio duties in and out of Studio One. And it has this particular special power, which is this row of inputs and outputs on the top. These are exactly the same as any other inputs and outputs you would find on another audio interface. It's just that these have been repurposed to give you easy, patchable access to Eurorack. So they're just audio ins and outs, which we are going to use for control voltage because they are DC coupled. Over here I have a little synthesizer voice called the Loki from Archaea, something along those lines. A 2 oscillator, lovely little synthesizer that we are going to control voltage into and control. It doesn't have MIDI, it's just an analog control voltage driven piece of modular. That's all it is. You could be using a separate VCO, a separate VCA, filter, envelope, that kind of thing. I just thought I would make things easier by showcasing this little fella. But of course, with modular, your setup may be entirely different, but the concept will be the same. We're trying to drag MIDI sequencing out of Studio One through this, converting it into control voltage to control our modular. That's the flow. That's what we're trying to achieve with this, in case you hadn't grasped that already. So to do that, we use a plugin, a virtual instrument plugin within Studio One called CV Instrument. You'll find it under Instruments. Just drag it into a track and it appears. This is all it is. It's very simple, but completely brilliant in what we can do. So we have a pitch output and a gate output. Pitch output being the notes you generate within MIDI. Gate output being note on, note off. Essentially, that's the way it's being translated. So how do we make this connection? Well, we simply have to connect to the physical audio outputs that we want to use to connect to our modular. So it has to be a DC coupled output, and on our Bitwig Connect interface here we've got outputs 9, 10, 11 and 12 to choose from. So we can choose 9 for the pitch and 10 for the gate. I should just point out that these don't get labelled like you might have labelled your audio inputs within the song setup. They're just there stated for reasons I can't explain, but that's what we have. So with output 9 and output 10 selected, I then need to physically patch those in. So output 9, going to patch that into the pitch input on the Loki. Output 10, I'm going to patch into the gate input. Now there's one last connection that we can make which turns it all sort of into a complete self-contained modular connection, and that's to plug the output of your oscillator or your synth voice or the end of your modular chain back in to the CV instrument so it can appear within the mixer within Studio One. I can do that here by taking the main output of my little synth and plugging it into in3 here. Now this is a normal audio connection. It doesn't need to be DC coupled. You can plug it into any input on your audio interface. It doesn't have to be special. But I'm just continuing the ease of patching by using that one there. So with a bit of luck, then I've got to set it here in the audio in section. Now this does use your song setup for your inputs and outputs, so you might need to go and set that up, as indeed I do. So song setup, audio I/O, inputs. I need to add a couple of monos for 3 and 4, so I can call that in 3 and in 4. So now within here I should have the input that I need. Great. So my little my little thing is set up, which is brilliant. So let's see whether it works. Well, as you can hear, we're getting audio and we're getting a response. We are certainly opening the gate, but there's no pitch information going on. Now, that may simply be that we're kind of out of range because there's no sort of automatic correlation between the voltages that Studio One is producing and the response of our piece of modular gear. They could be completely unrelated, completely different. So using my MIDI keyboard, if I go further up the octaves, we're then starting to become within range. That's as high as I can go. But as you can see, probably, that's an octave. There's no octave there. That is not an octave. Just turn that a little bit more. So to find an octave, it's nearly 2 octaves. But clearly it's not right. And you'll find whatever oscillator you plug it into, you will get a slightly different response. So for instance, I could plug this into an oscillator up here, just as an example. So I've got the Pony VCO here, there's a voltage per octave in there, there's the signal output, which is going, where's that going, over there. So that's another VCO over here. Just need to unplug the other one. So that's it connected to the Pony VCO. It's given us a different level of pitch. So same idea. So whatever you plug it into, it's not going to be quite right on your first try. So how do we sort this out? Well, let me tell you. So what we need to do, ultimately, I'm sorry, I'm going slightly mad. What we need to do is calibrate it. There's a nice big fat calibrate button here, and that's what we need. So to do that, what the CV instrument needs to do is take in the pitch from the oscillator and compare it to the voltages that it's sending out. It runs this little routine to test those things against each other. So to make that happen, you need to have the audio from your oscillator plumbed back into that audio in. So the fact that we've set that up already, because we want to use the audio input within our console within Studio One, means that that's already sorted out. I've already got the input plugged in. But you need to make that connection. If you are mixing somewhere else, you'd like to mix outside of Studio One, then you're going to need to just route an audio input back in to CV instrument just to do the calibration. So let's go. Let's see what happens. Calibrate. Go. There we go. It's giving me a green tick. That means it should be good. More or less. Obviously it's dependent upon your oscillators as well. If those are a little bit sort of creaky and vintagey, then it may well be that it's not entirely absolutely perfect. But that's what we love about our analogs. But we now should have an absolutely usable connection, MIDI, going through Studio One into our synthesizer. So there you are, we have now a MIDI connection going to our synth. That's brilliant. So we can now sequence to our heart's content. We can create whatever you want within Studio One. Make it a couple of bars long, shall we say. And we can record as you normally would with anything else. So I could stick it in, I could stick a metronome on because we're still using Studio One as normal. have this connection now. Your CV instrument has rather cleverly created this modular loop. So you're sending out, you're sequencing something, and then you're bringing that back in and affecting it within software. It's quite elegantly, brilliantly, simply done. Now, can you do anything else? Well, you can. For instance, we could add some drums. We've got 2 more outputs. We could use those purely as triggers and trigger something drummy at the same time. So let's try that out. So we go back to instruments, bring another CV instrument across. Now with control voltage, it's not like MIDI where you've got multi-timbral, you've got multiple channels, you've got all sorts of polyphony sort of stuff going on. With control voltage, you can only do one thing at a time. You control one thing at a time. You can split that off to control many, but initially, if I want to run a drum kit, I have to have a control voltage output for each of those drum sounds I want to trigger. So I'm going to take out number 11, not on pitch, just on gate, in order to run a kick drum. So for that, I'm going to want a pattern, I think. Let me turn that off for the moment. So I've got that here. It's drums. It doesn't actually matter because I'm not going to be sending it any pitch information. I'm just sending out gates. So to do that, I can just stick 4 to the floor like so, and let's see what happens. So, well, I need to patch it to something. So let's do that. Output 11. I'm going to put that into my little Beatsy here, which is a little drum module. This fella here, Beatsy. So kick drum. So I'm taking the output of Beatsy, which it's got different drum sounds within it that you can trigger individually, but it has a mix output. So that's going to make things a little bit easier. So I'm going to plug that into In4, go back to my CV instrument, and for the audio input, use In4. There you go, there's something. So let's run that and see where we get to. Right, let's bring in another one. This time we're going gate out to 12. And I'll take out 12. Plug that into snare. Okay, so what else can we do? So there are a couple of ways that I can manipulate the CV instrument into producing modulation. It's not designed for it particularly. I think this is a little bit of a workaround that I'm using, but it seems to be effective. And so, heck, let's use it. Because Studio One doesn't have a way of generating voltage without generating a note. For instance, in Bitwig, there's a CV knob. There's just a CV generating knob, and you can then control that and automate that in order to send out voltage to do and modulate whatever you like. That doesn't exist in Studio One, but we can use and, abuse the note output in order to generate or emulate or get somewhere close to some form of controllable automation and modulation. So let me show you how to do that. First of all, I'll just show you what I mean. So we've got our CV instrument. That works, right? So the keyboard is sending out pitch information, which is then appearing as voltage. Now I could do the same, but take that voltage in order to control something, like, for instance, the cutoff. So if I go down to what was the snare track and now put the pitch to output 12 and the gate to nothing, I can send pitch from my keyboard out of output 12 and into the control voltage input on the filter, which we can't hear because we're not triggering any notes. So if I set the sequence running, I can now open the filter with the pitch of the keyboard. Are you with me? So in which case I can create a sequence which then opens the filter. To make this easier, let's just put in a single note. So you can now see that my single note and my notes here are now adjusting the filter. Are you with me? Good, good, I knew you would be. Now I can improve upon this if I increase and turn on the glide. Well, you think you could. But glide needs to be legato, I think. So you need to have an overlapping of the notes. So now I'm getting a smoother run between these notes. It's no longer being stepped. It's been smoothly glided between in order to create more of a wave of modulation. In order for that to work, your notes have to overlap. If this seems like far too much trouble, you're probably right. So what else could we do? Well, the other way of doing it is using pitch bend. Pitch bend seems to be the one thing that will get you there. Now again, you need to fire a note first because it has to have something to pitch bend against. So if we leave one of our notes up here, take this all the way across, get rid of the other notes, there's nothing going on, but if I push the pitch bend, I can open and close the filter. So then all I want to do is record that. And that does nothing at all. There you go. Alright, so we can do something slightly better. Slightly better. If I open this up a little bit. We bring up our automation and we'll find pitch bend under there. Let's bring that on. So I've got pitch bend both embedded in the thing and then not in the thing. So let me undo the pitch bend, whatever it was that I recorded on there. Okay. Are you still with me? I don't know. Sometimes Studio One just sort of goes around itself backwards. So we're going to add pitch bend from the MIDI control here. So now I've got an automation lane with pitch bend. So I can go, right, get this, to my sine wave, and I can flip and draw it in. Look at that, look at that. So there you go, in the most long-winded way possible. That is the CV instrument within Studio One. It has possibilities. It has potential. I really like that audio input. The way that they've sort of molded that into an entire instrument so that it appears in your console and allows you to mix it with everything else. That is quite interesting, and I'd only just noticed that in working with it today. I thought that was only really there to do the calibration, which of course it does also have that function, but it just had not occurred to me that is then bringing the audio back in for mixing, which is rather splendid. So if you did have an audio interface of lots of inputs and outputs and lots of DC coupled outputs, you could be mixing your modular and controlling your modular from Studio One all at the same time. That's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. But otherwise, you've got note sequencing, and you can use all the pattern-based stuff within Studio One. You can use the launcher. All of that will work perfectly well because the CV instrument just acts as a MIDI to CV converter to take your sequence or take your keyboard playing and plug it into your modular. Brilliant. The audio bringing that back in means you can mix it. Brilliant. The modulation aspect, I mean, that's just me messing around with what I think it might be able to do. You know, you can do a little bit of change using legato notes and glide, but perhaps the pitch bend was the find that is really going to work, because you have these beautiful bits of automation you can do, these sine waves and other waveforms within Studio One which you can paint on, and it will be brilliant to be able to use those better and easier into our modular. Currently having to make it move pitch bend, I mean, it kind of works, but it's not the most elegant solution in the world, and I would really encourage PreSonus to give us a CV knob to control. Give us that parameter, something that generates voltage within Studio One itself in order to start using it for modulation. Then alongside your CV instrument, you could just have a CV modulator. And all it requires is the definition, defining the output, and a knob that you can modulate. Throw into that panel a bunch of LFOs and stuff that's already there, and it's an absolute winner. Total winner. Total game changer, as people would say. But otherwise, in an enormously long and overblown nutshell, that is the Studio One CV instrument as it is at the moment in version 7.2, which is what I'm currently running. I hope that was helpful. It's been fun for me, I have to say, and in the meantime, go and make some tunes.